House of the Dragon Episode 2 takes place 6 months after the death of Queen Aemma Arryn. At the end of the first episode, King Viserys named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. He summoned high lords from around the realm and they bent their knees and swore their allegiance to her. However, nothing really changed. Rhaenyra continued on as their cupbearer and they continued to ignore her. On top of that, Lord Otto Hightower began to make moves. He told his daughter Alicent to go visit King Viserys in his chambers and she did just so. They continued to meet for the next 6 months, and Viserys grew fond of Alicent. He even told her to keep their meetings a secret from Rhaenyra. Meanwhile, Lord Corlys Velaryon tried to enact a plan of his own. Lord Corlys and his wife, Rhaenys, met Viserys in the garden and told him that the Iron Throne looked weak. They encouraged him to marry their daughter, Laena, so as to strengthen its position. That came as a surprise to Viserys. It had only been 6 months since his wife had died, and King Viserys was still mourning her. So he hadn't really thought about marrying anyone, let alone a young girl such as Laena. But clearly, others had been thinking about it. Otto told Viserys that Corlys had overreached, but Grand Maester Mellos thought that it was actually a good idea. Mellos told Viserys that marrying Laena would repair the rift that had been created when the realm had chosen to pass over Rhaenys and Corlys, and Lord Strong said something similar. He told Viserys that Driftmark makes for a better ally than foe. So, Lord Corlys Velaryon, Grand Maester Mellos, and Lord Lionel Strong all thought that Viserys should marry Laena Velaryon. The only person on the small council who opposed it was Lord Otto Hightower. And who won? Lord Otto Hightower. In the end, King Viserys chose to marry Alicent to the surprise of many, most notably Rhaenyra. Now, let's dive into the details, starting with the dragons. The oldest and largest Targaryen dragon was Balerion. Unfortunately, Balerion is dead. King Viserys was the last person to ride Balerion, but their bond was short and tragic. In the books, Viserys bonded Balerion and tried to fly him over to the island of Dragonstone. Unfortunately, Balerion didn't have the energy to do it. Instead of going back to Dragonstone, he flew around King's Landing 3 times and then he landed. That was the first and only time that Viserys ever rode Balerion. And Balerion died within the year. Since Balerion is dead, the largest living dragon is Vhagar. During their walk, it was pretty clear that young Laena was more interested in Vhagar than getting married to the king. Viserys told Laena that Vhagar was somewhere on the coast of the Narrow Sea, but Laena had a more specific idea. Laena told Viserys that the workers at Spicetown had reported hearing Vhagar's sad song at times. So that's where Vhagar is, a town on the island of Driftmark called Spicetown. As a reminder, there are 2 large islands off of the coast of King's Landing. One is Dragonstone. That is where Prince Daemon flew with Mysaria. The other island is Driftmark, the home of the Velaryons. So, Vhagar is the biggest dragon alive. She hasn't had a rider in 10 years and she is currently residing on the island of Driftmark. Since Vhagar is the biggest dragon alive, whoever bonds Vhagar is going to become much more powerful, at least in terms of battle. Speaking of powerful, let's talk about Caraxes. In the prior episode, Rhaenyra told Caraxes to burn her mother by saying the word fire in High Valyrian. So dragons are smart. In this episode, Caraxes walked out behind Daemon at the exact moment that Daemon wanted Caraxes to appear. That is because Daemon and Caraxes are bonded. When people bond animals and dragons, they exchange a piece of their souls. They become connected. Here's proof from the original show. Orell was bonded to an eagle. Right after Jon Snow killed Orell, the eagle attacked him. Why? Because a part of Orell's soul lived on inside that eagle. The same thing is true of dragons and dragon riders. There's a partial soul swap. As a result, there is sort of a telepathic link. That is why Caraxes appeared at the exact moment when Daemon wanted Caraxes to appear. It is also why Caraxes acts the way he does at times. Since Daemon has a fiery attitude, Caraxes also has a fiery attitude. And here's the best part. When a dragon rider gets mad, his or her dragon might hiss or even blow fire. When a dragon rider gets injured, his or her dragon might scream out in pain. Keep your eyes out for stuff like that. Speaking of dragons, let's take a look at Daemon. In the last episode, King Viserys' son died. Daemon was very sad, but he did something stupid. His buddies encouraged him to give a speech, and in that speech, he allegedly referred to his dead nephew as the quote, heir for a day. Lord Otto found out about that and he told Viserys. As a result, Viserys effectively exiled Daemon by telling him to go back to his wife up at the Vale. But Daemon didn't do that. Instead, Daemon found his paramour. He introduced her to his dragon and they flew off to Dragonstone. Daemon and Mysaria spent over half a year there, and eventually Daemon got bored. As a result, he stole the dragon egg which Rhaenyra had picked out for her dead brother. Daemon also left a note inviting Viserys to his second wedding. Daemon alleged that Mysaria was pregnant, and that is why he had stolen the dragon egg. But it turns out that was all a lie. Daemon was not getting married to Mysaria, and she was not pregnant. In fact, Mysaria does not want to ever bear children. So what really happened? It's very sad. Daemon just wanted attention from his older brother. That's it. That's the entire story. And Viserys knew it from the start.
My brother wishes to provoke me. To answer is to give him what he wants.
Nevertheless, Daemon knew how to get under his brother's skin. He stole the egg that had been intended for Viserys' son. Otto convinced Viserys to let him go to Dragonstone instead, and there was an awesome showdown on the walkway up to the castle.
Ah, yes, apologies. I couldn't recall.
Perhaps my prince recalls when I knocked him off his horse.
Very good.
Since Daemon was such a beloved commander of the City Watch, some of the Gold Cloaks had gone over there, so he was not alone. He had his own personal army, as well as his dragon, Caraxes. Daemon was definitely ready to fight if necessary, but then Rhaenyra showed up like a badass on an ever-growing Syrax. Princess Rhaenyra walked past the men-at-arms, and she even walked past Otto and the Kingsguard. She walked right up to her uncle, and they had a chat in High Valyrian. In the end, Rhaenyra convinced Daemon to hand over the dragon egg without any bloodshed. That was a nice payoff to an event from earlier in the episode. Earlier in the episode, Lord Corlys brought up the growing threat of the Triarchy down on the Stepstones. Rhaenyra spoke up, suggesting that they use their dragons as a display of force. Unfortunately, Otto cut her off and he had her father kick her out of the room. In poetic fashion, Rhaenyra showed up unannounced and won the day through a show of force on her dragon. Now, let's talk about Sir Criston Cole. The Kingsguard has 7 members, but their Lord Commander died in his sleep. As a result, Sir Harold Westerling was raised to Lord Commander and a new spot opened up on the Kingsguard. That raises the question, did Sir Ryan Redwine actually die peacefully in his sleep, or was he poisoned so as to open up a spot for a new appointee? Either way, Lord Otto Hightower had wanted to fill that spot with someone from a noble house, someone who would presumably benefit him and his family. But Rhaenyra wasn't impressed by the options that Otto had chosen. Rhaenyra pointed out that they were all tourney knights, all but one of them, Sir Criston Cole. Rhaenyra chose Sir Criston Cole since he was the only one amongst them who had any real combat experience. Granted, there might be other reasons for her choice. 6 months prior, Rhaenyra had been very impressed when Sir Criston had defeated her uncle. On top of that, Sir Criston Cole is a good-looking bastard. That might or might not have played a part, but even if it didn't yet, it might play a part at court in the future. Now, let's talk about the Queen Who Never Was. Princess Rhaenys is King Viserys' older cousin. She is sometimes referred to as the Queen Who Never Was since she had been passed over. Rhaenys has had her eye on Rhaenyra. First, she watched Rhaenyra choose Sir Criston against the advice of Lord Otto. Then, Rhaenys saw Rhaenyra looking down upon her father and Laena. Rhaenys used this as an opportunity to tell Rhaenyra her opinion on the matter. Rhaenys told Rhaenyra that her father was going to marry someone, that he would have children with that woman, that one of those children would be a boy, that boy would eventually come of age, and when he did, the men of the realm would look at that boy as the heir, not Rhaenyra. Why? Because that was the order of things. Rhaenyra confidently countered by saying that she was going to create a new order, but Rhaenys laid out the truth one last time very clearly.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
She also noted that Rhaenyra's father isn't a fool, implying that he realizes that he needs a son as his heir. Regardless of whether or not that is how Viserys feels, those words will haunt Rhaenyra. At dinner with her father, Rhaenyra brought up the prior conversation about using dragons as a show of force against the Triarchy. Even though they were alone, Viserys cut her off because he was not interested in her thoughts on the matter. This made Rhaenyra feel small. As a result, she chose to do something big. She flew off to Dragonstone to do what Otto could not. When Otto got to Dragonstone, Daemon was ready to fight if necessary, and the odds were in his favor. Daemon had the high ground, he had loyal soldiers, and he had a dragon. Then, Rhaenyra showed up on her dragon, a clear display of force, and it worked. Aside from the fact that Daemon loves her and didn't want to fight her, Daemon was impressed that his niece had blossomed into a true dragon. Little did she know, while she was over at Dragonstone, her friend Alicent was secretly meeting with her father again. Rhaenyra is very smart, so she knew that people wanted her father to remarry before he knew that. She opened up about it to her friend Alicent inside the Sept. Little did she know, Alicent had spent the past 6 months subtly working her way into Viserys' heart through acts of kindness. Alicent was so smooth that Viserys didn't even realize that that was what she was doing by order of her father. And when Rhaenyra found out, she felt betrayed. In Alicent's defense, she had encouraged Rhaenyra to speak to her father, and she had also encouraged Viserys to speak to Rhaenyra. They had plenty of chances to do so, such as this dinner here. But what did they say? Nothing. Just crickets. So Alicent literally tried to get both of them to speak to each other, and they chose not to. So it wasn't all her fault. Moreover, Viserys and Alicent both lost someone whom they loved. Viserys lost his wife, and Alicent lost her mother. And they were both very kind to one another, so there's that as well. At the end of the day, Viserys still looks at Rhaenyra as his heir, and he chose to remarry Alicent so as to protect their family by creating more heirs. And now, the ending. Before Lord Corlys inherited the Driftwood throne, he went on 9 voyages. The last of those 9 voyages made him very rich. In fact, House Balerion became richer than even the Lannisters and the Hightowers. After his 9 voyages, Corlys married Rhaenys Targaryen, who was the only child of Aemon Targaryen. Since Aemon was the heir to the Iron Throne, Corlys had assumed that their own children might one day inherit the Iron Throne. Unfortunately, Rhaenys was passed over not once, but twice. So in a way, Corlys himself had felt passed over not once, but twice. And just like the North, Corlys remembers. When King Viserys chose Alicent, Lord Corlys felt rejected for a 3rd time. As a result, he went back home and he summoned Daemon to a war council. During this conversation, Corlys spoke very passionately about the legacy of his house as well as his own personal accomplishments over the years. High level, Lord Corlys pitched the idea of taking matters into their own hands. In other words, Lord Corlys wants to go to war in the Stepstones. It's worth noting that Daemon warned Corlys to not speak poorly about his brother. So, even though King Viserys effectively exiled Daemon, even though King Viserys sent Otto Hightower to Dragonstone to get the dragon egg back from Daemon, even though King Viserys had Otto Hightower exile Daemon from Dragonstone, Prince Daemon clearly still loves his brother. Little does he know, his older brother accidentally cut his hand on the Iron Throne, and even worse, his brother has grayscale.